What family secret was finally spilled in your family? That my parents had to get married. They always told us they got married in 1961. But it was 1962. 3 months before my sister was born. What's amusing is that my father was an accountant who was insanely fast with math. Whenever he was asked how many years they'd been married, he'd be off by 1. My mother would correct him through clenched teeth and then my father would nod and agree. My great-grandmother wasn't actually Mexican but rather was adopted by a Mexican family from a Chinese family who was being kicked out of Mexico when railroad construction was over. She always had more typically Asian features but only spoke Spanish and it was never really questioned. 23andMe is a hell of a thing. My mother is kid number 7 of 10. My aunt, kid number 4, who was born in 1945, did her DNA and found out that she has a different father from everyone else. She was devastated. There was always rumor that there was an affair but nobody talked about it. She has so many questions but nobody is alive to answer her. In the 1970s, a dead girl was found on my grandpa's property. Everyone including the local police just assumed she was in with a bad crowd and murdered by drug dealers. In the 90s, some of his grandkids came forward about all the molestation. After that, people started to realize grandpa probably killed that girl. My grandparents are first cousins. Found out my grandma had a baby as a teenager and was forced to give him up for adoption by my great-grandparents. I see a lot of stories about people finding out that who they thought was their parents weren't the people raising them, and this one is a little bit different. My dad always thought his father who raised him wasn't his biodad and the father thought the same. He was treated terribly by his father because the father was told he couldn't have children and my father was born prematurely, but at a healthy weight. So, everyone assumed my grandmother had an affair and got pregnant with my dad. It was to the point that after my grandmother died, my grandfather failed to even mention to his new wife that he had a son and grandchild, me. Years later, my dad gets an ancestry DNA test for him and me. He find out that his dad was actually his biodad. It was shocking and sad. My cousin is actually my sister. Apparently my mom got pregnant really young and her much older sister adopted my sister and raised her as her own. It was actually an amazing moment when we found out. My cousin, sister, and the sister I was raised with and I are really close. Just happened last year. We're all old now. I'm 50 and my cousin sister is 58, so it's just a really neat thing that makes us all happy. My de facto uncle, he and my aunt never married but have been together since well before I was born. With a few hiccups, has a child with another woman. It became common knowledge when the girl was 6 and was starting to understand the situation. At first it was a bit scandalous but she's been welcomed with open arms by my entire family, including her half-siblings' maternal grandparents. She's treated the same as all the other kids her age. Her half-sister, my cousin, has a daughter the same age and they're best friends. Go to the same high school. Totally inseparable. Technically aunt and niece, haha. She comes to all our family events and she's an awesome kid. We're all stoked to have her in our family. After my mom died I found out the real story behind my parents' marriage. She came to my father's country to visit some of her relatives. Met my father and after just 1 week she asked him to marry her so she could stay in the country. My father accepted because he had no one else and his parents were pressing him to get married already. But the highlight of the story is that over some time, the two of them fell in love with each other. Their love only grew over the time and they were really happy together. My mother spent her last days very ill, and she would accept only my father by her bedside. He swears to this day that she was an angel sent from God to take care of him. I am shocked that they got married just like that, out of the blue, and ended up loving each other so deeply. I can only hope to have as good and loving marriage as they had. Edit. I had no idea my parents' little secret would touch so many people. Thank you all. It means a lot. My uncles are infamous criminals who killed multiple people. I thought they bred dogs. Edit. Thanks for the awards. They may have also bred dogs. We found out after my grandfather died that none of his 7 children with my grandmother were his. And that they all likely had different fathers. About a month ago, my mother-in-law's 88-year-old sister revealed on her deathbed that her husband's best friend was actually the father of all 4 of her children. Her husband was an abusive grade A jerk by all accounts. While everyone was shocked, no one was saddened by this news. Nanny I had when I was younger was actually my dad's attempted sister wife. My great-grandfather didn't die of cancer. He died from complications after being shot when one of his businesses was being robbed. Maybe. He also spent a lot of time in Atlantic City. He also had a lot of partners in the Teamsters and other unions in coal country. Also, everyone called him Smiling Tony, but his name wasn't Tony. He died in the 60s. Long before my time. But when my great-grandmother died 20 years ago, a very old guy showed up to the funeral in a white suit and all of the oldest people in my family kisses his hand. When I asked, no one knew who he was. My grandfather moved his family away from central PA in the late 60s and disconnected from all of this, but there it is. My mom and older brother are not biologically related to me. My bio mom died sometime after I was born, leaving me, my sister, and my dad behind. My brother was the one that told me. My parents never told me because they wanted to protect me from the truth. But my brother thought that was a BS reason for me to not know. I don't know if my parents know that I know the truth. But I don't want to bring it up either. Edit. To address some questions. My mom immigrated here along with my older brother when he was a kid. My dad also immigrated here and my sister and I were born after he came. I don't know much about our family history beyond that. My brother revealed this info around when I was 18. He isn't the type to lie about something like this. He also said my sister is apparently aware of the truth because she has a memory of my bio mom being in physical contact with her. I don't think too differently about my family because of this. My mom is still my mom. We went to my grandmother's for Christmas dinner like we did every year and my uncle drank too much. And kind of hinted that he had an affair with my mother. A couple of months and 2 DNA tests later we found out my sister is actually his daughter. My dad never spoke to his brother again. And of course, my parents got divorced. And I needed a lot of therapy. And chocolate. Gosh, we are trash. My great-great-grandfather was exiled and banned from Missouri for being a sheep thief. After I was molested by my uncle, it came out he had done this to another one of my sisters and my family covered it up. Particularly my mother. Now I know why my sister didn't like how close my uncle got to me when I was younger. I was 35 when my mother finally admitted to me that she'd been lying about who my birth father was. She waited until after I'd reached out to his other children and we all thought we were siblings. He later confirmed I wasn't his. She refused to tell me who my biological father really was. When my sister was diagnosed with cancer and her survival chances were low, it inevitably came out that she wasn't my sister. Parents must have felt we should all know the truth just in case. She survived her treatment. And will always be my sister. Edit. Oh. Thanks for the kind words, everyone. Great-grandparents' 60th anniversary party at hotel ballroom with cousins, second cousins who hadn't seen each other in years. My mom and I were talking to my grandfather. Mom. Whoa. I haven't seen Chuck, Fred, and Claire in years. Me. No kidding. When do you think we'll get a group this big back together? Mom. Gramps' day is in 6 months. We'll see some people then. Me. 6 months? Isn't it his 60th? All. Dot. Gramps. Huh. I never thought about that. My grandfather was 60 when he realized his parents had a shotgun wedding. The scars on her elder family member's wrist were not from a botched suicide. They were from her mom trying to protect herself and her kids from the approaching Red Army. That was at the end of WWII in Germany. This made it so much worse. Due to 23andMe, my dad learned that his recently deceased father was not his biological father. It wasn't a situation related to my grandma cheating either. It was a sperm donation. So, they knew this was the case his entire life. Pretty crazy they never told him. His parents did not pass until he was 65 years old. Talk about a curveball. My grandmother recently died. She was famous in our town for her amazing cooking catering. In particular her turkey dinners. Notably, her gravy was absolutely amazing. So delicious. She had a heart attack several years ago and her near-death experience convinced her to share some of her secret recipes with me. All except for her gravy recipe. When she died this spring, I was going through her pantry and found an entire bucket of KFC gravy mix. She was literally using KFC gravy mix as a base to make her incredible gravy. Huge scandal. LMAO. Edit. Used infamous when I meant famous. Found out my uncle is actually my brother. My mom had him when she was so young that my grandparents raised him. My dad fathered a child in high school. His side of the family knew. And my mom. We found out years after he died that we have a half sister. My mother often had stories like, at your age, we got up at 4 AM to work on the farm. After the job, we went home to have lunch with your grandfather. Then we walked 10 kilometers to go to school. And when we were back, we used to work in the field in a tractor until it was 6 PM to go and cook dinner for your grandfather. And me like, yeah, but he didn't work the farm with you in the morning? And she was changing the subject. I learned in Easter that my grandfather was alcoholic. Got drunk every night. Didn't get up in the morning to go to work. Or was in fake jobs to lie to the family and go to drink. While the children had to go in elementary school and manage a farm. Then he was in prison because he touched the neighbor's children. When he got out of prison, he took out a loan of $30,000 in my grandmother's name. Ran away with the money. Then he died a few years later. My grandmother bought herself an used Ford Limited. And no one cried at the funeral. 30 years later, I learned who my grandfather was. After my grandfather passed, we found out he had fathered a child when he was posted in Italy during World War II. He never knew. His mother intercepted any letters from the Italian girl. He came home, met and married my grandmother and had 4 children. I forget who in the family found out and how. It's crazy to think we have a whole Italian family out there. Edit. Went to sleep and woke up to crazy notifications. Thanks for the awards. To clarify, I'm in the UK. Not that it's relevant to the story. My oldest aunt is 77, so this kid would be at least 79 by now, I would think. I've considered doing the DNA testing, but some family members aren't comfortable with how those companies could use the information. It's a really sad story. But if his mother hadn't intercepted the letters, I wouldn't exist. It's a weird place to be in emotionally. Imagine that Italian girl sending letters and believing someday a reply will come. This is years ago. And I only got a few rough details. But my baby mama's dad wound up getting caught in a sting trying to purchase a teenage girl. He had a separate apartment all set up. Transferred the funds, and when he went to the delivery meet, was arrested by the feds. That my grandfather was an atomic soldier. Instead of sending him to fight in the Korean War, they sent him to Nevada, where, after having him turn away from the initial flash, he witnessed the mushroom cloud. After that was over, he was ordered to march to the detonation point, where he was unwittingly exposed to high amounts of radiation. Luckily for my family, my grandpa is now in his 90s, even after a few cancer scares, and the rest of us, my mom, aunt, cousins, sister, and I, are cancer-free and fairly healthy. But this is medical information that we really should have known earlier. When I was 5 years old, 1988, Santa Claus left a Nintendo on our front porch. It was wrapped in newspaper. And my parents had no idea who gifted it to us. My dad, particularly, tried to figure it out. He was always suspicious that it had been a family friend. It was by far the best gift of the year. And we played it all the time throughout our childhood. My dad died in 2004. Last Christmas. My mom explained that she was the one who had bought it and surreptitiously placed it on the porch. My dad really liked to be in control of things and had forbidden the purchase. She knew better. She didn't tell a soul for 30 years. My aunt wasn't my grandfather's child. He met my granny when my aunt was a very sick infant. She had polio and wasn't expected to survive. My granddad married my granny so she could get on his insurance and move to an area that had proper medical support. My aunt was the first infant to survive open heart surgery at Yale New Haven Hospital. And although she had to be in leg braces most of her childhood, she had a great, although not long enough, life. My granddad loved her like she was his own. And I never knew until she went to her bio dad's funeral when I was a teenager. Editing to say, thank you to everyone who's shared their family stories or left a comment. I've spent the whole evening reminiscing and sharing stories I haven't really told in a long time. And that really means a lot. Thank you so much to everyone who's given an award. Or left an upvote. I haven't been able to comment on everyone's stories, but I've read them all and deeply appreciate them. This has been the highlight of my week. My sister cheated on her husband throughout her entire marriage to the point that all 3 of her kids have different biological fathers. That's like the reverse of Mamma Mia. Grandpa was a serious Nazi German war criminal. As a young teenager, my grandma shot her pedophile father in the back while he was sleeping. He had been molesting her and all her siblings. She ran away after being hidden by her brother for some time. Her father survived though. Thankfully my grandma never faced any legal consequences. But she was batshit crazy until the day she died. My aunt told me at her funeral because I asked why grandma was the way she was. My great grandma was Cherokee. Until I took a DNA test and have no Cherokee. A lot of the older relatives are mad about that one lol. When my mother fell ill and I took over her finances, I found thousands of pounds of gambling debt on her credit cards. Then I found adoption papers for a child she'd had before me that she'd never mentioned. Then another family member told me my dad didn't die in a car crash but committed suicide in prison. Uncle had tried to commit suicide over a love triangle. He survived. Edit. Since so many people have been asking. He survived. And left the country afterwards. This was a huge hush story, and ironically, I heard it from my aunt, who was the woman with whom he was in love with. Yes. I'm from one of those countries where cousins can legally get married. But it is discouraged due to the obvious. But yes. From what I was told, he changed into a bit of religious freak afterwards. And no one ever spoke of what happened ever again. I only just recently heard about this. But my grandmother had gotten a little drunk with my dad and brother a month or so ago and started talking about our great uncle Ferber. Not sure on the spelling. But from what I heard, he apparently killed quite a few people and buried them on some family owned land in a swamp. My father's brother killed 4 girls when he was in high school. My father was the one who found out and told the police. My grandmother was my grandfather's babysitter for his first wife. So turns out one of my cousins was actually a different aunt child, but she wouldn't raise him, so another aunt adopted him to keep him in the family. Only my mother and her siblings knew this until his biological mom was dying of cancer and they decided to reveal it. It was really shitty. Especially because he has a biological sister that was little more than a long distant cousin. He was around 24 when this all came out. Turns out my grandma had a secret affair and my mom is an illegitimate child. This completely shattered grandma and mom's relationship until gran passed away about a month ago. Also apparently I'm a quarter Iranian. Edit. Duck's sake. How many more of you are going to read Iranian as lesbian? My 10 years older than me brother molested me when I was 2. He was 12. It came out when he was doing his AA amends and he told me. My parents knew and he knew obviously. But my other brother, sister, and I didn't know until 10 years later when my brother decided to get sober. This is kind of messed up. But my parents told me my mom had a bad back because I pushed on her spine during birth. This was what I thought all my childhood. I think I was in my teens when my older brother told me my dad pushed my mom during an argument and she fell and had to have surgery. Semicolon. I thought I ruined my mom's back my entire childhood and those sobs let me believe it. Right after my grandma passed away, we found out she had a secret son she gave up for adoption. Thanks Ancestry.com. Crazy thing is, my wife just found out she has an uncle nobody ever knew about from her dad's side. Thank you 23and. Sounds like what those ancestry sites are doing is proving our parents' grandparents are a bunch of horny liars. Uncle-in-law died in his own filth. It came out he was a pedophile. He had been on the run, and he was found naked with his 2 youngest daughters by his son. The ensuing beatdown resulted in UIL getting a stroke and being bedridden until his death. My aunt, his wife, left him to die in his own filth. Possibly because the stigma of being married to a pedo was too much. My cousin, the one who did the beating, was the one who found him dead. He delivered the news a day after completely drunk. UIL parents and siblings refused to give him a proper funeral, which is a big duck-you in our culture, and instead buried him without a headstone. Another is a supposed rich aunt. It came that she's broke and in debt. She refuses to come back home because she's afraid of my mom, who she stole money from. A cousin in my family had been secretly stalking harassing another cousin for like 3 years. To a really bad degree. He eventually admitted it. However, didn't face any consequences. Never gave any good reason for it at all and didn't even know the other cousin very well. He just randomly decided to stop doing it. Lot of family was in denial over it because he seemed like a nice guy. My wife's mother's family, in rural Iowa, had a schism within the family around inherited farmland. So growing up, when she visited grandma for 2 weeks in the summer, she never knew about second, third cousins living in that small town. My wife found out when we started using Ancestry and tracing family. Not a huge secret but interesting long-standing family feud. My maternal great-grandmother did not like Norwegians and went to her deathbed insisting she was full-blooded Swedish. My father is half Norwegian, so he and my mom got a lot of flack from her. It was mostly in good fun, but it could get to my dad. After she passed, my grandfather, her son, revealed that she was a quarter Norwegian. So my father, the half-breed, was no more Norwegian than her own father. Mom's uncle hanged himself in the basement. Family, kids, found him. My grandma had a daughter she gave up for adoption before she married my grandpa and had their 4 kids. The daughter found my family through distant cousins or something and my grandpa was like, cool. More family. But my grandma wants nothing to do with her and told my mom and aunt that they aren't to contact the daughter until she dies. Relative did not just fall off a bridge with her baby. She jumped. It seems obvious in hindsight but they reported it differently both in the news and to younger family members. Edit wow this blew up. I just want to say it's been weirdly really nice reading all of the comments here. I knew this was common in a hush hush way but never the stories of other real people like this.